Hey everyone, welcome to the Star Wars Canon. Today we're going to be talking about episode 2 of The Bad Batch, Cut and Run. Guys, what do you think of this episode?
Really enjoyed the episode. I continue to love the dynamic of these characters. I think we've, begun to realize Star Wars landed on this formula of this child mentor father mix. And I think that theme in Filoni projects kind of just continues to resonate with audiences and resonates with me at least. I think it's really cool. And I continue to like Omega a lot and think she has a lot of potential to be a fan favorite. So for me, this deepened that feeling.
Yeah, I really dug the episode. I liked that we kicked straight off from where the premiere started, and that we got this second episode pretty quickly right after, and that we got to see a little bit more of the featured characters in the Bad Batch and sort of their skill sets and their specialties, and that the show wasn't afraid to go and revisit characters that we've seen before, which is really really refreshing too.
Yeah, I agree with both you guys on this point. It was really cool to see kind of references to places and characters that we had previously kind of established in the Clone Wars series, and thought this episode did a lot of heavy lifting in terms of kind of developing our characters, particularly Hunter and Omega, and building that relationship, as you kind of referenced, Dan, into like this father-daughter dynamic. But definitely getting a lot of vibes similar to what we were seeing in Mandalorian, which is pretty cool. But let's get into recap. Scott, maybe walk us through kind of what happened in this episode, and then we can kind of do a deeper dive into things we caught and other speculation we might have for next week's episode.
Sure. So this episode picks up right after the premiere episode, where they were fleeing Camino, and are the Bad Batch minus Crosshair plus Omega currently, and they head to Saleucami, yeah, as to meet up with a former clone deserter, or a former clone trooper that's a deserter, Cut Lawquane, that we had previously seen in Clone Wars, and sort of Rex had helped him sort of establish his life outside of the clone army. And Cut is married to Sue Twi'lek, and they have two children. And there they learn sort of a little bit more about what's going on outside of sort of the limited knowledge post sort of Clone War that they'd gathered on Camino. Cut introduces them to the fact that they have these inhibitor chips in their heads, and that's what sort of triggered Order 66. And even the planet that Cut's on is now sort of an increased military presence. And so he's actually, upon their arrival, is planning to escape with his family to another world. Cut and Hunter sort of go in to try and book passage off planet for his family. And they learn that the Empire has now sort of introduced these chain codes. So you can not only just buy a ticket onto a shuttle to get off world, but you sort of have to have been granted permission and have these chain codes to book a transport. And they know, because Cut and all of the rest of them are sort of deserting clone troopers, that they'll be arrested if they try and do that. So they have to come up with a plan to steal some and use tech to sort of reprogram them to be able to be used by Cut and his family. So Tech and Echo managed to steal and sort of forge some chain codes alongside Omega's help, who sort of sneaks along for the mission. They go and get a sort of ship impounded to be able to sort of get in and gain access to some chain codes, and then deliver them to Cut just in time for his family to sort of board a transport to escape. Throughout this, you kind of get the sense of Hunter and Omega, and Hunter is kind of in this fatherly figure role for Omega, but doesn't really feel like he maybe can cut it for her, and decides to send Omega with Cut and his family, so she can have a real family and have a real life. But she sort of sneaks away from Cut and his family and comes back to the Bad Batch and lets them know, like, I'm one of you, I belong with you, and I want to see this through and see what we can do together. And the two groups sort of depart separately, but move on from Saleucami. And that's
Yeah,
that's sort
great.
of what we get in the episode.
Great recap, Scott. And again, I think for an episode that I think could be on initial viewing kind of seen as like a filler episode, maybe, I do think we get so much, I think, progress in our characters, right? Like we go from beginning of episode Hunters trying to kind of pawn Omega off, right, on on cut, and doesn't feel like you said, he can kind of do right by her and then raise her. By the end, he makes a definitive statement like, "Hey, you're here. Like, if you want to be here, you're part of the team." And it feels like in that moment, Omega kind of officially becomes one of the Bad Batch, and we're only in episode 2. Like, I feel like with take for instance Mandalorian, Din was trying to pawn off Grogu still in season 2, and so this show is like progressing, I think, in a pretty rapid pace, and we still have 14 episodes to go.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think how the show started with seeing Omega just kind of being a kid a little bit on the planet with the other kids, and actually not knowing how to do that was kind of interesting. Like, I think it again made the character more likable very quickly. Like, she's so amazed by dirt when they land there. Like, it's like never seen dirt before. Kind of reminded me of Rey when she, got to Mos Kanata's castle and was like, this green is everywhere. I think she's just very likable. But that scene with the ball, I think a fun thing to mention in there was that, she gets outside the fence and these kids are clearly scared about what's outside the fence. And we see a Nexu show up and is after, and Sue kind of immediately goes into sharpshooter action, which is pretty cool to see as well. But we haven't seen a Nexu, I think, since Attack of the Clones, so kind of neat to see.
Yeah, I think they just did a really good job of not putting the pressure on of they have to have Tarkin, immediately on their heels and things like that. And after, this beefy 70-minute plus premiere that we had, you got a little bit of room to breathe, but also do some really good world building to show about the characters. You could see the pace that the Empire is moving at to increase their hold on everything now that the Clone Wars are over. And then just see a little bit of what life is like going to be on the run, but as well as sort of what the average, people on just a random planet, what they're having to put up with now that the Empire is taking over. You get a little bit when they're learning about the chain codes that someone else is just trying to get on a transport and they're like rejecting them, even though they've already been cleared to sort of fly off previously. This new thing now sort of reneges their travel.
Yeah, and I found the whole kind of exploration on kind of the chain codes to be really, really interesting. And actually, due to Cut's involvement in this episode, went back and revisited it. The season 2 episode where he first appeared in the Clone Wars series. And really interesting kind of tie-ins there. But one of the things that stood out to me is Cut has this conversation in that episode with Rex about moving from just numbers to named clones. And then here, I think we kind of have a payoff, years later in an entirely different series where now we're going from names back to numbers with the chain codes and kind of showing that progression to tyranny and to the Empire. I thought that was a really cool, interesting thing there that they did. The other thing that's top of my mind, with the whole discussion of chain codes, was what we had seen in the last season of Mandalorian and Boba talking about his chain code and kind of talking about his father's legacy. And that, for whatever reason, as I was watching, kind of hit me that in a really interesting kind of poetic way, we're seeing clones of Jango, Cut and Hunter, have these relationships with their children that or even adopted children in the case of Omega, that Jango really, I think, wanted desperately and kind of was denied that and cut short by his death on Geonosis. But just really kind of an interesting thing to think about, that in some way his like passion to like raise a kid kind of carries on through these clones of him in other ways.
That's a really cool point, Josh. I mean, I think like in general, Django was a good dad, which is just a weird conversation to kind of have. But I mean, I think like they imply that a lot with kind of the dynamic with Boba and, just the way Boba mourns him in that sequence. And you're right, that like compassion carries through in his clones. And I mean, Cut seems like a great dad in this, and just the way he handles the Omega situation. But Hunter kind of is doing better than I think he thinks he is, which is kind of cool too. He's a lot like Din. I mean, there's so many parallels to Din Djarin for sure with this. And I mean, I think that's going to be what the show is kind of about. It seems like now, this relationship between Hunter and Omega and what that means.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think just the way you see it, Cut kind of transcends that like normal standard, like who a father should be. But through the episode, you kind of realize that Hunter is the right father for Omega, and that they have more in common than they think. She doesn't necessarily just need a father figure, that someone's a dad for her, but she needs someone that can relate to her. And we don't know the extent of how she was enhanced, but we know that the rest of the Bad Batch has enhancements. So Cut isn't going to have the same experience with that Hunter has. So it'll be interesting to see their relationship grow as the season goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think we definitely have to talk about a little bit is when the Bad Batch arrives and kind of first starts talking to Cut. He reveals that Rex literally just stopped by the day before, which is a pretty interesting detail for them to drop there. It makes me think that we're definitely seeing Rex at some point this season, particularly because they're kind of like right on his heels. But really, again, cool to kind of call back to that Clone Wars episode and show that that interaction in that series between Cut and Rex has led Rex to also return to Cut. So it really will be really interesting to see if Rex makes an appearance. And also, frankly, after this episode, I'd love to see more Cut. I think he's just a really interesting character. And maybe they'll do something similar to Mandalorian, where we kind of see a Avengers style team up towards the end of the season, where all the various characters we meet over the course of the season combine forces to battle together.
Yeah, I mean, what they've done with the Clone Wars and now with Bad Batch in giving clones identities, I mean, it's just added so much more heart to even the prequels, which really intentionally made them clones, and made them kind of all the same. I think that's been kind of Dave Filoni's real gift to this whole era with it, and Cut is just the perfect example of it. I mean, he's really got a very unique personality built out with this, and it seems like the clones are all looking to him sort of as a guidance of, well, you got out, how do we get out right now? I did think though in that dialogue about Rex, he said Rex was going on and on about these inhibitor chips. It was kind of interesting that immediately Omega stepped in and actually confirmed them. So Omega was aware, which I think adds again another like mystery to what are the Kaminoans up to and what is Omega up to. There's a conversation that I thought was really cool between Hunter and Cut where they're discussing, what's the deal with Omega, basically. And he says she's defective just like me. And he's like, Kaminoans don't make these decisions, without intent. There's a plan here. And I think I'm curious how long it'll take to unveil that plan, but that seems like a really interesting plot point for the rest of the series.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Dan. Something that also kind of struck me about this episode is kind of just an interesting tie into maybe some of the other pieces of canon, but the relationship between Cut and Sue, being that he's obviously a human and she's a Twi'lek, also reminded me of the relationship between Kanan and Hera, and kind of, if I remember this correctly, and feel free to let me know I'm off base here, but I believe their son was a human with green skin, where it appears that Cut's and Sue's kids are more Twi'lek. So I found myself a little bit curious about how that works, but pretty interesting to see the variations there.
Yeah, I think Kanan's kid had green hair. I want to say.
Maybe that's
For
it.
some reason I was
But
thinking
he was human. He appeared human.
Yeah,
Yes.
Jason
Yeah.
Sandola. But yeah, I thought that too with the kids. I mean, they don't look exactly like a normal Twi'lek either. So I think we are seeing cool like blending of the races, which is a really, just neat thing to see them carry through in different species on Star Wars.
Yeah, their skin tones were definitely like more muted, less vibrant than most Twi'leks, like a little more towards like a human skin tone.
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, I'm interested to see what you guys were saying with Omega, and that like she clearly, based on that conversation, it seems like she was created with intent for some reason, and I think it'll be interesting to discover how we learn about that and sort of what's unique about her, but also who they might go to learn about that, because I think there's a lot of other characters that have science backgrounds or other things, or if they have to make a break back to Camino to try and do a heist to sort of get her records or something like that. I think there's a lot of really interesting ways it could play out that they discover more about her as the season goes on.
Yep.
I also wanted to say, going back on the Imperial stuff with the chain codes, there were a lot of Solo vibes from that.
Yeah.
Really reminds you of that opening sequence from Solo. And it's also, I mean, clearly meant to like in some way emulate like the Holocaust type of feelings of giving people numbers. And there's a great little exchange that Tech has in there about, well, that's very like practical or something. And like, Echo is just like, well, that's one way to look at it. And yet again, it's just an interesting dynamic amongst these clones, and Tech is just a data machine basically and just looks at it as data, but you quickly see how they're dehumanizing everyone in the galaxy and turning them into numbers. The Empire is just quickly taking over control, and it's faster than I imagined, which is kind of neat to see it work like that.
Yeah, I definitely also got vibes of Solo, or similar feelings to Kira and Han trying to get off Corellia and having issues there, but it was very kind of anxiety inducing of just how quickly they kind of just stopped all these folks from leaving planet and really took control in an impressive way very quickly. I thought that was super interesting and well done, and I hope we see more of that going forward in the season. Just what are the impacts of the rise of the Emperor or the Empire on kind of everyday people, and the common people around the galaxy. I think that could be a really cool way to kind of show the aftermath of the rise of the Empire.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see where they go from here now that they sort of are aware of sort of how fast the Empire is moving, and that it in a sense that no place could be safe. So I'm really interested to see. I mean, I think we definitely got to foreshadow that Rex has got to show up at some point. Is he sort of the next one they go to? We've already seen them interact with Saw in the premiere. Do they go and sort of get roped into that more quickly? Or are we going to see them sort of bounce around for a little bit before they land somewhere to sort of develop a plan to what their long-term situation is?
Yeah, I mean, I still continue to think Omega's force sensitive. Like, I'm going to throw that still in as my prediction with it. I believe that. So I'm thinking at some point we're connecting with a Jedi, probably. It's probably one of the ones we know. So like there could be some interesting tie-in or cameo from one of the Jedi that still survived Order 66.
You're 1 for 1 with your predictions, because last week you're convinced it was going to be cut that they met up with in this episode. So
yeah.
Which also, I mean, if it turns out to be true, Dan, I mean, again, another parallel with Mandalorian, and sending Grogu away with Luke. So be interested to see how that plays out. But I'm also interested, like you, Scott, to kind of see what the end game here is. If these characters ultimately kind of want to, go undercover or kind of live a quiet life out on the outskirts of the galaxy, or if we see some of them get involved with the early formation of the alliance and kind of use their skills to fight the Empire. So not quite clear right now where we're headed, but I think that's part of the really exciting thing about the series is, I think so far it's been fairly unexpected and surprising, and it's been really all good stuff. So I hope they keep surprising us and throwing us curveballs.
Yeah, one thing I've been thinking about is just what other stuff they've got sort of on the horizon. And we've seen like older Rex and whatnot in other shows that we do have, and knowing that the Bad Batch has already interacted with Saw, that we do have the Cassian Andor show coming out, that it could be a way that you bring in, any surviving older Bad Batch members into like a live action, just as part of the Resistance. They don't have to be even main characters, but you could just learn that they sort of are still around and join up in the Resistance, depending on where their character arcs go. So
Yeah.
I would love to see live action Bad Batch. I hope we just get something with that at some point. They're too cool to not put Tamora Morrison in a different set of makeup.
Yeah.
And look.
I mean, it could just be Hunter or whoever's around.
There's been enough edits of him this week in every way, shape, or form. Blonde-haired Tamora Morrison is trending.
It's awesome. Well, great, guys. This has been a really good discussion. As always, everyone watching, please make sure to subscribe to Star Wars Canon, as we'll be doing videos for every episode of the Bad Batch going forward. And make sure to like our videos as well. And we will continue to also cover all things Star Wars canon, from the books to the comics to everything coming out in the near future. So thanks for watching. Have a good week, Nerf Birders.